Ryder's Oakland Works and Collaboration enjoys special recognition by the Office of the Mayor, the City Council, UC Berkeley, Mills College of Northeastern University, ABC 7, and KQED. So I want to give Malcolm a very warm welcome. And I'll just say one last thing to my students, which is please put your class and your first and last name in the chat so I can issue credit for you. Thank you for those who've done that. And then just to remind students, when we talk about photography and developing visual literacy, we also talk about architecture as a visual language that communicates ideas. So this talk, I think, is going to be particularly fascinating in taking that to another level of thinking of landscape photography intersecting with portraiture. So, welcome, Malcolm. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia. And hi, everybody. I want to say one thing just before I switch to screen share, which is in the work that I'm doing now, the way that I work, the single most important thing that happens is that I meet somebody who tells me something that I didn't already know. And we're going to have a Q&A here. And the fastest path into learning new things, I think, always is to start with questions. So when we get to that point, please, please, please don't hold back. I hope we don't have enough time to answer all the questions, but I'm going to stay available to Cynthia and Judith for a pretty long time. And I hope that gives adequate opportunity to interact with you. So let me switch. I'll do the screen share thing here and we'll get rolling. So the title of this, Alt Oakland, one of my friends was half jokingly warning me not to use this title because not so long ago, putting the prefix alt in front of anything was politically a bit sensitive. I decided actually after that to be sure to put it here because we're in Black History Month, and one of the first things that matters to me is that we make a commentary about where this history comes from that we want and what we become familiar with. Yeah. The general saying is history is written by the winners. I think probably all of you have heard that before. I've changed it to the persuaders because that's what I want to be. That's what I want the people whose neighborhoods and homes I visit to be. And that's what I want all of you to be as well. So the other thing I'll say is everybody hates reading slides and trying to listen to people at the same time. All of this stuff is going to be available to you, so you don't have to read a word here. I'm going to just keep talking, and hopefully I stay in sequence with these pictures so that if you make your own notes, they'll still make sense later. I've talked about landscape as portraiture. That's not necessarily an obvious thing to put out on the table, but the way I think about it is that when you make a portrait, you create a version of the subject that communicates something about the subject, and you decide whether that communication is going to be more about how they want to be seen or how you want them to be seen. So it's very, very important to me to stay close to the origin of the work that I do now. Moving to Oakland in the mid-90s to raise a family, I was struck by how much the town is denigrated, given the dramatic differences, good and bad, within its boundary. The consistency, though, of these harsh portrayals seem to have just as much of an agenda as the contrasting marketing of Oakland's music and Oakland sports, two things that the whole country likes to enjoy and be entertained by, but they somehow mysteriously don't link it to other things in the community. But of course, the quality of life is far more serious a depiction of Oakland than sports and music and entertainment in general. And the description of that quality of life is assumed to represent the people who cause it, not just those who may be at risk. And the disparagement that I'm pointing at covers class and communities and race. It's not one or two of those things, it's all three of them combined. So as a resident and as an artist, it wasn't lost on me that, like propaganda, there's an important difference between facts and fiction. About Oakland, the heavy focus on interpreting things negatively is an even bigger problem than some of the particular real problems, because the negative portrayal, actively discourages people from thinking about things here any other way. And that discouragement and its misdirection obscures the good, and that has impact both personally and politically. So I committed to working against all of that harm, all of that negativity as an artist with my photography. So here's more notes that you'll have in your hands later. Uh, Photography has historically been used both to expose and condense. In that purpose, its force comes mainly from how it presents scenes as, reality. So to counteract one version of the reality, a different version needs to be able to work through the reasons why the undesired one works on people. And it needs to get past those reasons or replace them. So in short, what I'm doing is developing with photography, hopefully a contrasting experience of what is recognizable about Oakland. So I'm already deciding what I want Oakland to look like, to go back to that portraiture theme again. When you do have this in your hands and you've got time to play with it, mark it up, agree or disagree, this will be the one thing that I think is worth hanging on to that you might not have already run into someplace else. But the three key things on here are the words at the bottom: bias, habits, and interest, all of which are hugely influential predisposers of how people experience what they see. So this picture emphasizes that expectations, especially the ones that are repeatedly reinforced, are usually the start of how people see things. Before they're even looking, they have expectations. So in the left column on this picture, there are four types of strong expectations. And then each type of expectation crops up as a form of bias or habit or interest. So we've just named those phenomena in this chart. And then at the far right, there are corresponding things that cause change or must change in order to get beyond those expectations that you see over on the left. So that's how this works. At the top right, there are three ways that these expectations get formed and reinforced on a continuing basis. And these dynamics are the issue to confront, whether we're thinking in terms of photography or some other art or some other kind of action. So I work with what I see at street level, mindful of avoiding the predispositions that feed into the negativity that I'm trying to replace. I intend for the people's truth, which gets smothered or denied by preconceptions, to be the basis of my imagery. And this gives me the foundation of my work. Three principles that every shoot that I conduct respects on its way to generating distinct individual images. This word vernacular comes up again and again in my work and the writing about my work. And what that's pointing at is that people have their own way of communicating about themselves. And that's what I'm looking for visually as well. Now, to keep my practice consistent, I want the camera to be dominant in demonstrating how to see things differently. So for all of you who make pictures, you know that the easy way to talk about that is to talk about point of view and what time of day and what's the light like and so on. You're just trying to put yourself in a position to get the camera to capture, what you want people to pay attention to. And I always have a camera on me that it's a smartphone camera. It's a high-end smartphone camera, but it's always on me everywhere I go. And more importantly, it's something that almost everyone I know has. So what's always on my mind is I'm doing something that I think anyone can do, but they have to choose to do it. I only shoot what's already in front of me, something that anyone else could see if they were standing where I was when I took the picture. So there's no manipulation after the shot and so on. What you'll see in a little while is um, it's just what was in front of me after I made decisions about what I wanted people to pay attention to. So the point of this is to demonstrate, a way of real-time seeing that anyone can practice. My attitude is there's no difference between my eye and my camera. So this idea of a sense of place is where my pictures will either maybe make you think of somebody else's work or stand out as something that is fresh to you. And re-envisioning is another way to describe in one word, what my photography of Oakland is. So in my description here, when I say vernacular, I'm especially referring to the non-institutional, non-commercial landscape. It's the personal or social landscape. And another way that I've taken to describing this, which I learned from some of my collaborators, is this is grassroots stuff. And I really like that idea. So this is how I've chosen to promote people. It's based on how they describe themselves in their own way. But as an artist, I take that a step further. While I learn and adopt things that are part of their way, I still consciously set out to describe what they've shown in my way. So I have to strike a balance every time I shoot. As I continue to shoot and add more to my way of describing things, there's an evolution, both in front of my camera and in my portfolio. So I've been doing this for 6 or 7 years now. Things that are typical for me now, today, or reminiscent of things that I did maybe 4 or 7 years ago. But they're not necessarily the same. There's growth process that's kind of built into what I'm doing. But the name of the entire portfolio, taken all together, it's called Oaktown. And it offers, one recorded version of Oaktown that comes from my interpretation. So that means also that my role as a persuader is constantly subject to criticism, or critique, if you prefer. Now I look at creativity as the constant in what I try to show. I'm looking for the Oakland inhabitants' creativity, and I'm also injecting my own. But also, much of what I shoot and later show is ephemeral or transitional, or in many cases, what I'm able to show in a picture now doesn't exist anymore at all. And that, of course, changes the nature of the picture itself as well. So in this writing on the screen right now, I'm talking about how things can be real and imagined at the same time. And what I intend the images to do is to get people to look at things in a way that's different from what's normal for them. The actual way that they look at things. And as an artist, I want the photographs to feel decisive about what's worth paying attention to. So getting them to be that way is totally my responsibility. So I want the photograph's way of showing things to cause people to pay attention to things that they might avoid or ignore. And if they're not seeing them now, it's not necessarily because they consciously don't want to and they go out of their way to not see it. But certainly that does happen a lot. And then it also happens in a more benign way. Either way, I'm trying to change that. Most recently, I have concentrated on just the West Oakland part. Oakland is huge if you look at it, from a bird's eye view, but I've been really focused on West Oakland in particular and the visibility of its people. And my presence there as an artist it is affecting what gets attention and how. And it's a slow process, but because it's a collaboration with the neighborhood itself, it's growing. Strategically, I collaborate heavily with other artists there to expand the range and reach of my effort. But of course, it's reciprocal and mutual. So the collaboration itself is named West Oakland Matters. And it now extends to creative people in many disciplines in the neighborhood. Bankers, developers, journalists, educators, lots of different inputs. And together, we demonstrate the neighborhood's creativity as the key to defining itself and defining its value. So that's the goal of the collaboration. So let me talk a little bit about the key ideas in this matter of changing how we see things. So in these notes, and again, I'm insisting that you wind up with them in your hands. You're going to see that I did something here. On one picture, I'm talking about what's called the mind's eye. And to me, this is really important as a way of talking about what we see and what the meaning is of what we see. So the key idea here is that seeing should be active. It is active, whether you're conscious of it or not. And the way that you look and the way that you see things pretty much defines what you see. Now, I'm oversimplifying by pointing out an experiment that maybe most of you have already done at some point in the past. It's really simple. And it goes kind of like this. You walk into a room and somebody says, find all the red things in the room. And as soon as they've given you that instruction, all the red things start coming out. They kind of come to the foreground of your consciousness uh, in a way that literally wasn't happening until somebody gave you a reason to look for things in a certain way. So I think if there were any scientists out here among you, you could probably point out, that that is an oversimplification, but I hope you get the meaning here. It's about the predispositions thing again. Now, the two really hugely influential predispositions, and they are cultural and conceptual and political. So what you can see here is my way of thinking through the problem that I'm confronting, and ultimately the way that I think through it winds up telling me how to make the pictures that I make. So I hope you get a chance and some time to go back to this and just compare it to, your own thoughts about it. So this is about the mind's eye, the mind telling your eye what to see. But the flip side of that is the eye's mind, the eye telling your mind what's going on. This pretty famous picture here on the bottom right by Hiroshi Sugimoto is one of my favorite pictures. When I make a photograph in my mind, it starts with nothing always. It's just a blank area, a blank surface. And as an image maker, I have to decide what's going to go on that blank area and why it's going to go on there. So those decisions are what turns my intentional observation into specific views that might be able to influence someone else. And again, for simplicity's sake, I refer to this as needing to make the picture, not take the picture. So the next step in this process is about taking control of the way we see things. And, for the artists among you, these 4 points that are here are about how I want the photographs as art to be an example, not just of something different being shown, but of seeing itself as a different experience. Now, a major point in this is that across the minds of different viewers, you can show the same image, the same single image, which is an object, but in that group of people, if you could see into their minds, you'll find out that that one image is turned into many different pictures. And not only does that happen in the moment when you have multiple viewers, but as a single viewer, just as yourself, you can look at an image on Monday and you can come back the next week and look at it on a Wednesday, and you might have a different experience of it the second time than you did the first time. So what changed? The image didn't change, but the picture that formed in your mind did. And so when that happens, you know that you came to the image with a bit different mix of things going on the second time than you brought to it, the first time. So part of my challenge is to get the image to influence how people pay attention to what is shown. And this goes back all the way back to the opening statement I made, which is that history is written by the persuaders. I want to have an aspect of authenticity and fidelity, in my photographs, but I am very consciously in the role of persuading people. It doesn't mean it always works, but that's my role. Finally, as an image maker, I'm very aware that all kinds of other images can influence the way that people see. It influences what they live with and what they choose to live with and what they use and what they like using or don't like using. All of that is part of the experience of seeing because it feeds into both predispositions and the interpretation that follows looking at something. So, learning how to see is something that's done in several different and omnipresent ways. Movies, painting, newspapers, they all can treat the same subject in different ways. And we consume all of that. So we're bringing our living experiences of seeing in other ways to the opportunity of looking at a photograph. I always assume that that's happening. I never assume that a gallery space or a nice frame or something is going to keep out those other experiences. And also because um, styles are associated with the purposeful, use of images. A style itself already is a part of the image's meaning. So that can either get in my way or I can decide to use it. Then there's another aspect. These are all related to each other. One where, as a photograph, I'll pose it as a question. Is this photograph a crime scene or just a snapshot? Is it an advertisement or is it just documentation? One image can be any of those things, and sometimes one image is more than one of those things. So all of these associations become something that I can use in image making. For example, to reinforce a new idea that I'm posing or to challenge a pre-existing one. So it means that also many different kinds of images can help me reach my goal, while collectively they all stay within my same three principles, of my practice. So I've got a collection of pictures here that we can take a look at together. And it's just the nature of the beast. We're only together right now for a limited amount of time. But I hope that you will enjoy going back and looking at these pictures again later and test me, compare what you see to what I've told you about why I make them this way and what I think they do. And if you want to make any kind of observation or question about that right now, we can start doing that immediately. So I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to flip through here. We'll leave the space open for anybody else to talk if you like. This will be the informal part of the Q&A. And then after we hit the last picture, we'll be sure that we reserve the rest of that time for more direct face-to-face talk with you. Take a look at the upper left corners in each case here. And these are labels that I've put on here just to help you sense how they belong to each other, to me. But these labels don't exist anyplace else. Also, we can go back and forth, through this stream. So let me know if we should go back. Now, again, in each case, I'm trying to let the environment and the landscape talk to me. And every picture here started out as a blank piece of paper. And so I'm out there with the camera and I'm looking for things that these days feel like the landscape communicating with me, showing me signs of how people who live in West Oakland whether they are fortunate or not fortunate, choose to shape that landscape and express their presence in it. So in this case, on the left, obviously, this is a homeless person who's made a home, created some intimacy there. And on the right, it's someone who owns a house and they've just taken over their front yard and basically put the living room out in the front yard. These two images get maybe more commentary than most of my other pictures. And I think they're really good kind of markers or introduction to um, what I see usually when I'm on the street in West Oakland shooting. But again, don't lose sight of the fact that I'm the editor. I'm making all the choices about what's going to get seen again. So it's my interpretation superimposed on their communication. Oh, I also talked about how often things that I can now show in a picture don't exist anymore. And generally, no one was looking at them the way that I did when they were still around. Thinking as a documentarian, I'm really, really sensitive now to the possibility that anything I shoot may not exist anyplace except in my pictures in the near future. And the pace of change in West Oakland makes that a real issue. See, what do we have going here? Okay, that's a pretty small selection, but taken as a group, they're part of the extended portrait of West Oakland that I've been making. And it's more than 1,000 images already. I would say that it's not the number that has any special meaning except for the longevity of the project, but it provides an awful lot of material to work with when, thinking about curating, um, or just putting an exhibit together. But my favorite thing though is to find places and opportunities to take the pictures and show them in West Oakland. And that could be in a situation like we're in right now together, or in a gallery, or sometimes I've actually just left pictures not on the street, but if there are tables and chairs lying around or something, I'll leave pictures and just come back and see later, what happened. Also, there are some opportunities like other artists incorporating some of this work into what they're making. There are street vendors selling clothes. and they're putting artwork on their clothes. So all of this stuff is part of a much bigger world of, just kind of fulfilling the goal of the project, getting the creativity that's already in the neighborhood to come into the foreground and become the major influencer on the quality of life there and what gets done next. Um, so I will say that I do hear fairly frequently that um, a lot of the pictures that I make strike people as taking something that's kind of ugly and making it look beautiful. I respect that comment. I think it's not something that people say insincerely, and they're not trying to hurt me by pointing this out. The only two ways that I can respond to it is that I was born into a family of artists and I'm a trained artist, and it's sort of second nature for me to make images that look good, if I can. That they are not the bulk of the work that I do, but when I make them, I'm pretty happy about it. Um, but the other response is that when I give the pictures to the people who live in these places, they like the pictures, and it does actually start this process of changing how they look at the place that they made. And they'll come back and they'll tell me, hey, I never really, I hadn't been looking at it this way. I didn't feel it that way. Now it feels different to me. And they like that. And I tell them, well, great, keep doing your thing. You live here. I don't live here, but you live here. So make your changes. Don't stop. And it's really, really important to me to get that feedback from the people who live there. So it's a little ironic that I don't put those people in the pictures. You're not looking at faces and bodies and things, but they're in here. And so I hope that you did feel that all along without me having to say it out loud. Okay, let's go to questions.
That was so amazing, Malcolm. Thank you so much. I mean, I have so many questions of my own and just observations of this work. And it's so interesting because I can see that you are painting what you see, but, or not painting, photographing what you see, but the way you're photographing these moments are, I'm able to see so much more than I ordinarily do. We have some questions, so I want to make sure to share these with you. So one question, previously, Ryder said the toughest challenge is to have people pay attention to what is shown in photography. And the question is, how do you make people pay attention? This is kind of resonating with what I'm experiencing.
So I think there are three or four things that I believe are reliable, in my practice to to focus or guide attention. And certainly one of them is to pick out something that usually seems to be really, really familiar and make it look unfamiliar.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing is, um, I spent a lot of time shooting both black and white and color while I was there. And as time went by, the pendulum swung almost all the way to color. And color is funny, because it's very emotional. Sometimes it's really hard to handle. And maybe a painter doesn't have as much difficulty, as a photographer does, because I don't change anything that's in front of my camera. But um, I feel like I've gotten more sophisticated about how to use color to pull people into the picture. And I don't always need it. But now I kind of rely on it, at least to get me started. And some of these pictures, well, like this one on the bottom left here, inside of a skate park. Um, I was in there for the better part of an hour before I finally figured out what I wanted the picture to look like.
Wow, that's impressive. We have
Yeah.
about we have a number of questions, so I'm going to move on to the next question if that's okay with you, Malcolm.
Yeah. Mhm.
We have about 6 questions in here. Um, uh, Dana asks, for a physical display, how do you choose to print them, meaning size, matte versus glossy, frame and unframe? This is a great question, having seen your work displayed.
Um, yeah, I love that question. Well, what you don't know from today, but what Cynthia is referring to is that I generally print these. They're big. They're not huge. It's 36-inch by 24-inch paper. I spent about a year testing different papers with my printer. We decided to use what's called German etching paper. Um, the pigment sits on top of that paper. It doesn't bleed into it. And the surface is not glossy. Um, all of those things are important to me because I don't want any reflections or glare or anything to sit in between the scene in the picture and where you are as the viewer. And the size that I've chosen, it was kind of trial and error to get to that size, but I feel like it's just big enough so that you don't feel like you're bigger than the picture when you stand in front of it. But it's still small enough so that you see the whole thing in one shot. It's not like looking at a movie screen where you're wandering around in the screen area.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was real I've seen your work and I think some of the pieces, I don't know if this is always true, but I remember that the works were not even framed. So there was that added layer of vulnerability, but the images and the colors were so rich. That's when I zoomed in and I was like, where do you get your stuff printed? So I just like swooped into all your years of research for my own work. But I'm going to move on to another question. Dana has a second. Well, I'm going to ask another one by Dana. You discussed the transitive nature of the area. How often do you make it a point to go back to the same location and record the change that has happened? Are there specific locations or sites that you really want to revisit? That's a great question from, I think, other works that I've seen where you're actually really in some ways documenting
Mhm.
gentrification. But I'll
Yeah.
let you speak on this.
Well, I'm glad you said that too. And thank you, Dana, for that question. I actually try to go back every 2 to 3 weeks to places that I've already shot. But I'm in West Oakland a couple of days a week. But sometimes I go there and I don't make a picture. I'm just learning. I'm watching things evolve and I'm forecasting. Oh, I bet that's going to be really unique and fragile, 6 weeks from now, something like that. The gentrification of West Oakland is a potential disaster to the legacy culture in West Oakland. And that's true all over the country. It happens everywhere. Um, but COVID was pretty bad for West Oakland, and gentrification is just as bad. So I just assume that if I can get down there and make a picture that I think communicates and that I like looking at myself, that could be the last time I see that thing that way. So I'm fairly diligent about going back. to try to keep tabs on things.
Love that. And then Mia asks, do you have an artist that inspires you? And if so, who? And she also asks if you could thank someone for support or inspiration along your journey, who would it be and why?
Well, I think you'll be really surprised by my choices, my answers to your question. Um, the I'm gonna name a painter first, Cy Twombly.
Mm,
Um, hugely influential on me, the way I think about pictures, what they ought to be doing, what I can be doing, and so forth. There's a French fashion photographer named Guy Bourdin, Bourdin, who completely changed my own picture making after I was introduced to him. And then I got to say that the longer I do this, the older I get, the more staggering the genius of Walker Evans is. Um, I don't even have a word to say what it is about his work that drives me now. And that may change, over time. But he's a ridiculously good photographer. um, and finally, um, I think I would ask you to go look at the work of a woman named Jan Groover. Jan Groover came to prominence for several reasons, but she did a suite of still lifes that were all done in her kitchen.
mm,
And that was also transformative work for me. Now, I've not really tried to name um, photojournalists right now because what I want you to appreciate is that there are really hardcore artists out there who push me as an artist, but photography is my chosen medium. I can't really separate their influence on me as an artist from my concerns um, as a documentarian or amateur sociologist or whatever else informs and communicates my sensitivity to places like West Oakland.
that's awesome. Is there anyone that you would uh, thank for support in your
Yeah, I
journey?
mean, personally, I have a partner in life and in art, um, a writer who's an editor and a poet, named Constance Hale. Um, and if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have recommitted myself to photography as much as I have um, over the last 5 years. The I mentioned that I was born into a family of artists, uh, two musicians who also were university professors. Their combination of what they did as thinking people and as creative people, um, it stamped me, from day one in my life. And although they've both been gone now for quite a while, uh, they still feel very alive to me. So at the risk of sounding a little corny, mom and dad were and always will be the biggest influence on me. They lived life showing me that being an artist, being an activist, being a change maker is all the same thing.
Love that so much. I'm going to get choked up.
Oh,
Um, Hilda asks, what are the demographics of the community members who are participating in the photo documentation?
mm. Oakland, West Oakland in particular, is an amazingly diverse place. Historically, it formed a really good, stable, middle-class Black community um, back in the 30s or something. But back then, passenger railway was a big deal, um, and the trains terminated in West Oakland, coming from all over the country. Shipping was much more fundamental to the economy then, and the Port of Oakland was uh, an incredible place. So if you go back and you find out about the Pullman porters, you'll start looking into a part of West Oakland's history that established it as a predominantly Black neighborhood. But West Oakland is sitting on land that already had an indigenous population. Um, the Ohlone are the origin, the source of Oakland, and it's been real hard times there in West Oakland. Also, until a few months ago, it had the largest single homeless encampment in the Bay Area, called the Wood Street Encampment. They formed their own community. Asians have history in West Oakland. Latinx have history in West Oakland. And right now, of course, um, the percentage of younger non-minority residents, has risen steadily. So that's just what, 5 different constituencies who all want to live in the same place. And they get to know each other, whether they like each other or not.
Great.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of where we are now.
So we have two more questions, and I want to be sensitive about time for those that need to go to other things. So I'm going to read both of the questions.
Okay.
Um, and I just want to thank everyone again so much for coming. And I hope that this is a bright moment in your day and that we've all had a bit of a reprieve from the craziness of what's happening out there. Thank you, Malcolm, for letting us bask in your work. And I'll read the last two questions from Carla. She says, "Hi. Do you have a most unexpected or challenging moment or a moment that altered your perspective on your work?" And then April asks, "Is there a particular time of day that you prefer to shoot?"
Hmm. So I prefer to shoot between about 10:30 and 3:30. That's a window. That window shrinks or expands depending on, what time of year it is. But it's all about having the sun in a position where I can use the shadows the way I want to, or avoid them completely. So I don't have any early morning pictures or night pictures or anything like that. Um, and I'm usually, in my sneakers on the street. Tell me the first question again.
The first question was sort of about challenges. Do you have,
Yeah.
what is like an unexpected or maybe the most unexpected or challenging moment that altered your perspective of your work?
So this is a big answer. It's not a long one, but again, I don't take pictures of people. Um, but I shot sports, theater, news. I shot nothing but people for a very long time. I got to West Oakland. I was a street photographer. I'm making pictures of people all the time. I came home one night, I looked at the pictures, and for all the kinds of things that I've talked about today, they look like theater to me. And I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to find a different way to show these people. No more theater.